Hello everyone, welcome back to Cindy's Library. Today I'm going to go over what I read in the month of November. So let's start out with Victober. I finished up Middlemarch, which was, by the way, amazing. And so I've already done a review of that on here, but I will post a link to the full review down in the notes. Let's see, Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. Shirley was quite interesting. Early days of the Industrial Revolution, two different ladies. In fact, in a way, you could almost call the book Caroline because Shirley doesn't even show up until at least a fourth, if not a third of the way through. But I found it very intriguing. Intriguing enough, I kind of want to do a paper now comparing Shirley with North and South with, I think it is Hard Times. That is the Dickens novel on the Industrial Revolution. And the interesting thing is all three novels were written within 5 years, two of them on the same year. So apparently this was much on everyone's minds at the time. I really like Caroline, who is really the main character, because I relate a lot more to her than to Shirley. I would be the Caroline in life, yes. And you also have the two brothers, Robinson brothers. Lewis is the tutor, and what is his name? My mind is drawing a blank now. It's already been 2 weeks and I'm starting to forget the story. But the main brother, he is the factory owner of the area at this time. He also happens to be sort of related to Caroline. And so there is that. The interesting thing is, at least in this book, as far as the Industrial Revolution side of things is going, our factory owner, he is in a hard spot because it is during the Napoleonic Wars, and there was a hard embargo against shipping to Europe at the time. And of course, shipping elsewhere was more difficult and complicated and more minimal. And so he has bolts of cloth that his factory has made that he can't sell because Great Britain is saturated and he can't sell to the continent. And so he is in a hard spot. But he learns and grows through his experiences, as do Caroline and Shirley. Lewis, he is the one we get the least of. But he's a fun character too. Very glad I read this book. I look forward to reading more by Charlotte Bronte and by Anne Bronte, so that should be interesting. So Shirley was the group read. Middlemarch was something I missed from an earlier Victober or haven't read yet that I was planning to read, and so I got that done too. Let's see, for the nonfiction Victorian book, I read My Dearest Albert by Karen Dolby. And so not quite as many of Queen Victoria's letters as I was thinking, but very nice snippets which give a good picture of how she was describing everyone and everything around her at that particular time. and all the information around them certainly does give a lot of background information, which I would say would be helpful for the newbie to Victoria. Anyone who has studied Victoria in depth probably won't find anything too new in there, and probably will want to look more at something more complete of Victoria's letters and journals, etc. But for a newbie with all things Victoria, I think it was a pretty good choice. I enjoyed it. She is a fascinating queen. Alright, so we talked about those, and I already said I was not dressing up for Victober, sadly, which they have a similar challenge next year. Maybe I'll have to do something about that. So the next challenge was reading in Victorian genres, and I got 2 checked off for this. I first listened to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. I think I read H.G. Wells' Time Machine, but I hadn't read War of the Worlds yet. And of course, it is a classic in science fiction, so I felt I should read it. And I now completely understand what C.S. Lewis was doing in response to H.G. Wells in his own space trilogy. Not that anyone travels to space in the War of the Worlds. Well, no one from Earth, I should say. The Martians obviously come over from Mars. But it is definitely what you could call the modern worldview. A worldview where space is dark and cold, and if there is anything out there, it is scary monsters. And the only hope for humanity is to try and spread out and colonize as much as we can. And C.S. Lewis, in his space trilogy, was completely responding to this with different ideas. I have to admit I prefer C.S. Lewis's worldview more than H.G. Wells in this, even though in the end things end well, at least for the moment. The future is always a big question mark. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of tropes in science fiction that I can see come from War of the Worlds. The tripods, the aliens that look like nothing familiar. Although as scientific as H.G. Wells tried to be, a lot of it's probably been disproved by now, I think. Not really a scientist, so I can't say for sure. But one interesting thing is the whole experience of being attacked by the Martians and Earth under the Martians and things like that. The one way it was really prescient, interestingly enough, was that I've read enough about World War I and trench warfare, thanks to J.R.R. Tolkien primarily. I read Tolkien and the Great War by John Garth. And also I've read Tolkien's letters and all of C.S. Lewis's letters before. And so I've got a little bit of knowledge about World War I, just enough to think that life being attacked by Martians and then under the Martians sounded suspiciously like World War I trench warfare, trying to hide, trying not to become a target, people out in the open getting mowed down, things like that. So very interesting. I'm glad I read it. I can't say it'll be one of my favorites that I return to. But like I said, now I completely understand C.S. Lewis wanting to respond to this. So I also listened to Fantasties by George MacDonald for the fantasy genre. It was one of C.S. Lewis's favorite books. It really affected him when he read it, and it inspired him to start changing his thinking away from modernism that eventually led to his conversion. Tolkien probably read it, I would imagine. Don't know. If he did, it didn't affect him as much. So, listening to it, and maybe this is because I have read so much in the fantasy genre on my own recognizance and fantasy before and after Tolkien. So I know a fair amount about the genre, and so for most of the book it was very stereotypical fairy world with knights and ladies and castles and woods that did odd things, and going to cottages where if you were lucky it was a safe haven where you could rest for a bit. So, fairly typical for the fantasy genre, nothing I haven't seen before. And then the ending came and changed everything for me, and I now love Fantasties. Don't want to give it away, so I won't give any spoilers, except to say that the theme of love, and not just romantic love, but platonic love, friendship as love and such, it is all comes together and is fulfilled in a wonderful way at the end, along with a theme of hope that is introduced at the end. So I absolutely love it now, and I will have to read it again and take the first 7, 8 seriously and see what I can come up with. I also want to reread it because of Tolkien, because there were definitely a few Tolkienian, specifically Tolkienian things in there. You have trees, specifically the beech tree, and that is the one that is friendly, and I think it is the ash that is so unfriendly to our hero. But that just made me think of Smith of Wootton Major, where the beech tree or not the beech tree, the birch tree and the ash tree play such an important part in Wootton's journey to Fairy at one specific time. So that would be interesting to take a closer look at. I do have Smith of Wootton Major on my list for Tolkien Talk. Not until sometime next year, but when I do it, maybe I'll have to read Fantasties again at the same time to take a look at that. One other thing I noticed is one specific cottage has 4 doors that go into different places. That reminded me of Hal's Moving Castle with its doors that open into different locations. So that is another one that could possibly use a bit more academic work comparison. And yes, Diana Wynne Jones is someone I would like to learn more about. So sorry about that. I got a frog in my throat and had to go off for a minute. But that leaves the last Victober challenge, which was Cousin Phyllis and Other Stories by Elizabeth Gaskell, since I wanted to read her. It has 6 stories in here, and I enjoyed all of them, though I don't know that Cousin Phyllis is my favorite in here. I have hope for Cousin Phyllis, but it's still a very sad ending, and no one meant anything bad or wrong. It's just kind of the way the things fell out, which is very sad. Oh. You also have in here, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, Lizzie Lay, which is another sad story. The ending is about as happy as the circumstances will allow. Morton Hall was interesting. It is probably about 50 years, if not more, reaching further back. Oh yeah, it does reach further back, all the way back to the restoration of the English monarchy and the Commonwealth beforehand. And so lots of history. Some of it is tragic, but in the end it seems like the tragedy has finally come to an end, so that is good. My French master is sweet and kind of bittersweet, because the French master is actually a French aristocrat. And he's in England because of the French Revolution. And eventually he does have an opportunity to return to France, sort of, but things are just not the same, and he's not appreciated, really. And so it's bittersweet. Sweet in that he does build up a good life for himself, so that's good. Half a lifetime ago is probably about 50 years. Maybe 25. And that one I do like. It is very tragic, but under the circumstances, you don't know what else she could have done. And I so admire her choice there at the end, with forgiveness and mercy and all those good things. So half a lifetime ago is probably my favorite short story in here. And the Manchester marriage. Again, no one means anything bad but ends tragically. Didn't know there were going to be so many tragic stories in there, but I guess that kind of fits Victober, so I guess that is appropriate. Also appropriate, I finished up Northanger Abbey, and I've already did a video review for it, and I will link to that. Jane Austen and Gothic for Victober. Well, along with Victober. What could be more appropriate? I also finished The Other Bennet Sister at the beginning of the month. I've already done a review of that, and so I will link to that as well at the bottom. The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. Let's see, what else do I have here? A Jane Austen Education. How 6 Novels Taught Me About Love, Friendship, and the Things That Really Matter by William Dershowitz. I hope I'm saying that right. Might not be, but yep. It is very interesting. William Dershowitz, he is an English professor. PhD and everything. Back when he was doing his master's, he had no interest in Jane Austen. Then he was forced to read Emma for a class, and everything changed. It changed his life, it changed his outlook, and it taught him important lessons about life that he had not yet learned, which is fascinating. I understand that it is not the fashion in English, in literature circles these days, serious ones at least, to talk about literature as personally changing your life like that. But I think it is wonderful. Uh, in a way, I would ask, well, if literature is not meant to change you, then what is it really for? Even if it is just to the extent that it gives you a new point of view. And so I really appreciated this book, found it quite interesting. And if there are any Jane Austen fans who are looking for nonfiction to read during Nonfiction November, and they've already read the letters and the biographies, etc., etc., and so forth, then you might want to check this out. I found it interesting. The Midnight Swan by Catherine Fisher, the third and final book in the Clockwork Crow trilogy. So I will be doing a review of this here shortly. So look forward to that. What I can say is that it is a most fitting end to this amazing series. Highly recommend it. I finished listening to The Book Girl by Sarah Clarkson. Quite enjoyed it, and I got way too many books added to my to be read pile now, thanks to it. But that is why I got the hardback version as well, or the paper version, I should say. So I can go back through and I will be able to go over different sections depending on my mood and actually find those new items that I want to read that I did not know about before. So very exciting to get more items added to your to be read pile as always. I started this a while ago and I've started reading it or picked it up again here in October. The Art of Biblical Narrative by Robert Alder. And so I am looking forward to what insight he will have on reading the Bible, the Old Testament specifically, since that is what his specialty is in. Morgoth's Ring. Book 10 of the History of Middle-earth. I hardly read any of it this month, which is bad because we're just about done going through it in the Mythgard Academy. And so I need to catch up and finish it. And that's the plan for November. Let's see, what else? I've started at the very beginning of Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is the next large Victorian book that I want to read, so that is the plan. Might go a bit slow, might have to switch to audiobook, but we will get through it because I have heard so many good things about it. Still chugging away through J.R.R. Tolkien's letters, but I got through a bit more this month, so that is good. And I did not finish The Prisoner of Azkaban, but I did get only now halfway through, so that is my month of October in a nutshell, reading-wise. So, love to hear if you read anything particularly amazing in October, especially if you did it for Victober. If you have any suggestions or comments, you're welcome to make them and leave them on this video. I thank you for watching, and until next time, I hope you stay safe and healthy, and as always, happy reading!